Have you noticed that yearly smartphone updates have become less and less exciting each year? In fact, I've been using the Samsung Galaxy S20, and this is the first time I could confidently say that I don't need to upgrade because it has been working so well, unlike the previous generations. You see, back in the day, before, let's say, 2018, there was actually a really good reason to upgrade every 2 years, or even once a year, because of the significant year-over-year advancements in the hardware. Now, after 2019, things seem to have stagnated, which could be attributed to the recent health events, the stagnating economies, and the very fact that we're just spending a lot more time at home, so we're not using our phones in demanding environments. So if you're deciding to upgrade from the S20 to S23, is 3 generations worth it? Well, let's find out. I'm going to cover each difference in detail, from the processor, memory, and to, of course, the good old cameras. So let's change these boxes into the actual phones. Now, before I begin, I will say, if you have an earlier generation like the S10 or the S9, you can stop this video right now, because the answer is yes, you should definitely upgrade, because there are major improvements in the processing speed and your batteries have probably degraded by now. Now, I just want to say that this review is on the regular S23. The funny thing is with the Ultra is all the big YouTube influencers, the big reviewers, they all receive the Ultra probably for free and they get to review it. So that's the thing that's being pushed on the most because it has the most advanced technology. And these ones are kind of like safe bets by Samsung, but they're still very important to cover. So first things first, let's talk about the design, the differences between the S20 and S23 in terms of what it looks like. Now, the first thing I want to say is I really like the design of the matte black, the phantom color for the S23. It just looks absolutely amazing. The back does not attract any fingerprints, and it just obviously looks very nice. And it's probably built for that one specific YouTuber, MKHD, who loves matte black. So they probably appealed to him so that maybe, he boosts this phone for Samsung. But anyway, that's a side note. But I have to say, it does feel very similar to, let's say, an iPhone. It looks obviously more boxy, edgy, but it does feel a little bit very kind of smooth on the sides. Now, obviously, it's a big departure from the S20 because the S20 is a lot smooth on the sides, and that's something that I actually miss with this design, because when I put this in a case, so for example, I throw it into this really cheap $5 case. One of the things that I like to do when I'm using this phone is I like to swipe to the edge. So you can see over here, I swipe to the edge, and this makes it really easy for one-handed gestures. I can go like this to see all my recent apps. Let me take off the eye comfort shield. So just swiping from the side is something that I do quite often. And so the thing is with the S20, when I put the case, at least the official case, so when I put it in the case, it was actually easy to slide and glide, but it did cause my screen protector to peel because I was kind of pulling friction. With this, you're not going to get that. Even I do have the official screen protector from the Samsung. I do really recommend it. The installation was really easy, and the fingerprint sensor works totally fine. It's really good, very good value. Anyways, when I slide, you can see that it kind of feels more, the edge doesn't feel very, very comfortable. At least you're not going to remove the screen protector every time you swipe. So it's a pro and a con, it's a little nitpick. So for this, I'm just going to remove this nasty screen protector, because every time I swipe to the edge, it would always come off. Like I just swipe and then it would just come off, and so let's get rid of it. I did like this film protector. It was really nice. It really kept this phone in really pristine condition for a long time. So I definitely recommend it. But wow, it looks way, way nicer now. Whew, what a big difference. The price you pay to protect your screen so that when you sell it to the next person, it looks nice. Another big difference between these two phones is the size. And yes, the difference is by 0.1 inches, but it does feel very noticeable when I'm holding it in the hands. So when I hold them side by side, you can see that the S20 is much taller. It may not look like a big difference, but when you hold it, it just feels skinnier and slimmer because you have the curved edges. Here, obviously, you have the edges that are more straight edge, and therefore it does look a little bit more boxier. So this feels really nice in the hands. This 20:9 aspect ratio just feels really, really good because you can kind of grapple it and hold it very nicely. Whereas this one, it feels a little bit harder to kind of grapple. So that to me is a downgrade from the S20. I much prefer the S20's design, but then again, it's a small nitpick. So another advantage of having a taller, skinnier screen is that when you're using the keyboard, you get more screen real estate at the top over here. Basically, you can use your keyboard and it feels less crammed and stuff like that. So I do miss that 0.1 inches, and every time I switch between the S20 and S23, I really feel the difference. So that 0.1 inch that you lose, if you don't compare them side by side, maybe it's not a big deal. And another benefit of having a smaller screen is that it uses less battery to power it. So you're getting that extra battery saving. So, and you get obviously a smaller form factor, which is nice if you really care about that. And you can see that in terms of the thickness of it, first of all, this is a thicker phone in terms of its depth. If you put them edge by edge like this, it's kind of hard to see in the camera. Obviously the S23 is a little bit thicker, and it's also a little bit wider. So another aspect of S23's design that I don't like is the camera placement and how it's so kind of big and obtrusive. First of all, it can collect a lot of gunk and dirt because it's not protected. You kind of have these like sticking out things. Thankfully, it doesn't protrude out a lot, but I just don't like that it takes up so much vertical space, because when I hold it, I always get my telephoto, the 3x telephoto zoom lens, I always kind of smudge it. And when you smudge it, it looks really, really bad. It almost looks like you're shooting with a potato camera from the 2000s. And I'll show you an example right here. You can see that the lens is smudged, and then once I clean the lens, it looks obviously a lot better. Now with the S20, as you can see, it is a really small camera array. You can see that the camera only goes down to the main camera of the S23 if you adjust for the bottom. And so your finger isn't going to get in the way that much. And cleaning it with a cloth, for example. So just being able to wipe down on the S20, the older design, and just wipe down and clean all the cameras in one go. I don't have to like meticulously go to each camera bump. And that's like a little nitpick, but it really does add up over time, because you're going to be constantly cleaning it unless you train your hands to not touch the telephoto lens, or maybe you're right-handed. I don't know. In terms of how you hold it, if you're like sticking out your hand like this, maybe you can block it, but I don't know. I always tend to smudge it. I just smudged it right there. So it's a really poor design. And the thing with iPhones, the iPhone 13 and 14 Pro, is that they take their extra lens and they shift it over here onto the other side. So, people laugh at it because it looks like a stove. If they were to put the camera higher up here, you're less likely to smudge it, because I never smudged the top two lenses, which is the ultra wide and the main lens. So that is another downside to the design. And I don't think they're thinking very clearly at Samsung why they did this. So it is what it is. So in terms of the resolution, I really didn't care that this went to 1440p, the old S20, because if you put it at the highest resolution, the ultra high resolution, first of all, the difference was really negligible to the human eye, because the screen is not that big. It's 6.2 inches. Same with this one, 6.1. So the pixel density is already really high at 1080p. Anyways, setting it at that high resolution would really kill the battery. And this battery already here has some struggling to do. If you pair that with 120 hertz on the other side, if you switch it to 1080p, the battery also is severely affected. Now with this, obviously we're going to get improved battery life simply by the fact that it's a newer phone, but this has more efficient everything, radio signals, CPU, memory, all that stuff. Everything is improved on this. However, the fact that, I don't really care about 120 hertz. I always keep it at 60 hertz, because when I'm scrolling and I'm looking at news and stuff like that, first of all, I disable all the animations, because I'm a developer. I need things to react instantly. I don't need to see this cool whoo, like every time I click on something, something just flies around. So I disable all the animations, and you can do that very easily. And everything feels really snappy. In fact, you could do that on an old phone and it would feel snappy. So the 120 hertz, I think, is just a marketing gimmick, and I really don't care for it. I'd rather have the longer battery life. So yeah, the differences between the screens are pretty negligible. It's mainly the size. Now, one nice difference between these two phones is that the fact that the S23 has a variable refresh rate, even at 60 hertz. So you can see let's say you're watching a video, it's going to be at 60 hertz. And then if you don't do anything, it toggles down to 24 hertz to conserve on battery life. Whereas with this one, whether you're at 160 or 120 hertz, it's just going to stay fixed at 60 or 120 hertz. Whereas at 60 or 120 on this, it will fluctuate between 24 or 120 and 60 respectively. So you get a little bit more battery savings with the S23 in terms of the refresh rate, if you do want to get that extra refresh rate. But like I said, 60 hertz is more than sufficient, and you save your battery. So let's talk about the processing power of the S23, which is a major selling point. First, it's important I share a little bit of history about the previous generations, the S21 and S22, which had awful chips. The Snapdragon 888 and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, which were SoCs on the respective phones, were both made by Samsung Foundry. And both these chips faced overheating and performance throttling issues. And because of the awful inefficiencies of Samsung's chips, Qualcomm actually finally went back to TSMC to manufacture the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And as you may know, TSMC is a company that has a much superior manufacturing facility. They're the ones that make the Apple chips, the super efficient silicon from Apple. So why do you care all about this for your S23? Well, it means that you get a powerful chip, but most importantly, you get an efficient one. Similar to when Apple migrated from the power-hungry Intel chips to their own Apple Silicon, the M1 architecture, going from Samsung to TSMC really made the first real generational jump since the S20, the phone that I had. In fact, the Snapdragon 865 made by TSMC in the S20 and the Tab S7 tablets is still so good to this day that I barely notice the difference in day-to-day task and speed when I'm just using both these phones. I'm talking about milliseconds when it comes to opening apps and stuff like that. Maybe if you give it something like more intense, like a benchmark, a Geekbench benchmark, you'll see more of the difference. But from day-to-day, like opening up the cameras and stuff like that, both were really, really snappy. Even to this day, this old phone that's 3 years old. So when it comes to running benchmarks like Geekbench, don't be fooled by just the high scores that you got on the S21 and S22. Those were big jumps in performance, but they're all made through inefficient brute force process by increasing the power consumption, and that also increased the heat and made a really poor battery life and just overall a bad user experience. Now, one thing to note is that the SoC, or system on a chip, isn't all just about the CPU processing power. The SoC handles all other things like the ISP, the image signal processing, which helps make your photos look a lot better, for example, in low light environments, or when it wants to generate a blurry background or do HDR, it can just compute more digital pixels and just make a better rendered image in the end. And other things like your radio signals, like your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular connection to 5G, all that stuff is in your SoC. And with the recent upgrades to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, you're going to see improvements all throughout the range. Things like the AI, the processing cores for AI, all that stuff is going to become more battery efficient and also just more powerful in the end. So if you do want to see nice gains, thankfully we still get it on the S23 when it comes to Geekbench 5 and 6, the most recent one. You can see that there's a decent sizable percentage increase. Now this next benchmark is really interesting, at least for me. What is the speed when you're using the browser, like HTML browsing, JavaScript and all that stuff? Well, you can use this benchmark called speedometer, and it's really cool that you can see such a big difference between the S20 and the S23. So I think this type of benchmark is really more relevant to the actual end user, because when they're using the browser or they're using apps that are HTML based, you can really feel the snappy difference in the new S23. So let's talk about one of the bigger controversial downgrades, and it's in the RAM. You're going to get less RAM from 12 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes. Now, is that actually a downgrade? Well, with the S23, you are getting a faster memory. It's supposed to be about 1.3 times faster in terms of the RAM speeds from the previous generation, and it's supposed to consume 20% less power. So you're getting a faster, more power efficient RAM, and you're also, if you do get the base model of 256 gigs, you're going to get the Wi-Fi 4.0, which is also an upgrade from this one, the Wi-Fi 3.1. So that means that you're going to get faster internal read and write speeds when you're, let's say, opening apps and stuff like that. Now, I'll be honest, when I was transferring, let's say, a USB 3.0, like I was transferring 5 gigabytes from my computer back and forth both of these phones, I did not get much of a difference at all. In fact, it was all capped out around 200 megabytes, and that's because the cache gets saturated at that point, so you can't get much further, or you can't get faster speeds like that, at least with the USB 3.0 technology I was using at the time. Now internally, let's say when it's like reading internally and writing and stuff like that, it can probably get those speeds. I did run a memory test, and I did notice that the write speeds and the read speeds are faster on the S23, but not by much. So this isn't a really big deal. Now, in terms of the actual day-to-day use, is losing 4 gigabytes of RAM a big deal? Well, in some ways, I don't think it is, because you can go into RAM Plus and create virtual memory. Now, there's also a lot of debate whether or not RAM Plus actually ruins your performance and your battery, because you technically have more background apps in the background, and that could be more problematic. You could just turn that off. Honestly, there's no day-to-day difference. These Android phones are very memory efficient. They can hold a lot of apps, and if everything feels really snappy. So the downgrade from 12 to 8 is not really a big deal. Maybe it feels worse in the pocket because you're paying more for less. Who knows? Now, a lot of people will always say, whoa, it doesn't come with an SD card slot. Well, this is the first time, at least for me, coming from the S20, I don't have an SD card slot. And I'm actually really thankful about this, because when I do a lot of media, like offloading onto my computer, let's say I'm filming a lot with this camera as like a B cam or a C camera, it just sucks to have 2 separate directories, one on my internal storage for, let's say, 4K 60 footage, because you can't record to an SD card because it's too slow. And then you have all your footage on SD card, and SD cards are just very slow unless you get a really fast one, blah, blah, blah. it's just nice to have everything in one actual hard drive space. And I find 256 gigabytes more than plenty. You have Google Photos to back up your photos. It's pretty cheap when you have Storage Saver enabled, the lower quality pictures that don't actually affect the photo quality, and the video quality is still 1080p. Honestly, having this, I'd rather just pay a little bit more and get the 256 gig and just not deal with the SD card fiasco or anything like that. So it really has no big effect. So I guess people with big libraries that want to put like a terabyte or 512 and they don't want to pay the premiums, maybe that's why the SD card. But I think for the average person, or I'm a pretty big power user, I really didn't care about this. Now, is the operating system taking a lot of space? Well, not really. Some people said 60 gigabytes. Mine was around 40 to 35 gigabytes, so not a big deal.
So one of the things that have kept me in Samsung's ecosystem is their One UI. It's actually really good. It provides a lot of value. There's a lot of features. For example, the most recent feature they've added is this thing called modes or routines. And here are two examples that I've made a custom one. One is tether and one is max battery life. When I go into tether, what will happen is it'll turn off my Wi-Fi, which is necessary to turn on the mobile hotspot, which it will also do. And then it'll open up my carrier app so I can enable some certain settings and blah, blah, blah. So all these actions happen. And when I disable the mode, everything goes back to the normal state. Similarly, if I go to max battery life, in this case, I want to turn on fast charging and I want to turn off protect battery, which prevents battery charge from going over 85%. Because let's say I'm going outside, I need a fast battery and I want my battery to go to 100%. I don't mind sacrificing my battery long-term life to get a little bit of short-term gains. But normally this mode is off and I have my battery protect on, which goes to 85%. And obviously I'm going to talk about the battery. It's been amazing. But yeah, this modes have been an excellent addition to One UI. And there's so many more other features that I'm going to talk about really shortly.
Another few quick pro tips. I really like putting the flashlight on the quick action here. One thing I really missed about some of the other phones is that they didn't have like a shake to turn on the flashlight. Well, this you can just quickly swipe on and off. Obviously, you can pull down and just turn on the torch or the flashlight from your menu over there. Another really cool tip I like is using one gesture. Honestly, it has been a game changer. Because these phones are pretty tall, being able to swipe and get notifications or get access to your tray anywhere from within any app. So let's say, for example, I'm in here. I can swipe here. If I want to get things like take a screenshot or like adjust my volume or adjust my brightness and stuff like that, I can just do this gesture of like long press like that. If I want to see my apps, I quickly swipe up. Let's say I go back to my camera. So this is how you configure it. This is called One Hand Operation Plus. It's an official Samsung app, but you have to download through the Galaxy Store, through the Good Lock. It's really, really good. You can set up all this stuff here, all these shortcuts. You can see that the blue tint over here means that this is where the gesture place is. So honestly, this has been a game changer. And it's one of the main reasons why I stick with Samsung year over year is because of the One Hand Operation Plus. That has been a game changer. So let's talk about something that's really important, and it's the battery difference between these two phones. I have to say right off the bat, the standby battery on the S23 has been phenomenal. It has been one of the best phones with standby. And what does standby mean? Well, you know that feeling when you're kind of, let's say, 30% battery and you're going to sleep, but you don't want to plug it in because you're really tired. So you put your phone on the side and then you wake up next morning and you miss your alarm because your battery drained for no good reason. Why is the battery running out so fast when it's doing nothing? It's just going to sleep. And Android has a lot of optimizations in terms of the software to make sure that background tasks don't run. Now, for some odd reason, this S20 has a pretty bad standby. I'm not sure if it's because of the battery or it's just that's how all the combination of hardware just made it seem like. And it just made it really hard to like use this, and I would always have to plug it in at night. With this, I can comfortably put this on my nightstand, even at, let's say, 10% battery, and I can be confident the next day it's going to be maybe around 6 or 5% battery. It's going to only lose 5%. And you can see the slope. I'm going to show these two screenshots side by side. You can see on the S23, it's barely sloping down. It's almost like a straight line. So it's like losing no battery over time. Now, I will update this video in a couple of years and inform you whether this is just an artifact of battery degradation or it's just the combination of the more efficient CPU, the SoC, all the radios, maybe Bluetooth is becoming more efficient. Maybe the cellular signal is becoming more efficient. All these things really do add up. It's not just the screen or the battery size or like all that stuff. It's a combination of all the hardware. Now, in terms of actually using the device, I keep everything on a pretty moderate profile. First of all, I do enable battery protect. At 85%, it will stop charging. I don't like charging beyond that because it will increase the heat, which degrades your battery. And I want this phone to last, maybe another 3 to 4 years. So 85% has been more than sufficient. I can last the full day. I get around 4 to 5 hours of screen on time. If you disable that battery protect feature and charge all the way to 100%, you're obviously going to get maybe like 5 or 6 hours of screen on time. So I don't need that. I'm always home. I'm never really out and about. So I can just have this always plugged in and, charging that way. It's really the standby endurance that has made this phone so enjoyable to use. Another major improvement with the S23 is the fingerprint scanner. Now, apparently we got this upgrade in the S21. We had a 77% larger finger area to capture more data and it just easier. So 1.7x the area. They also claim that it's 50% faster. And I have to say, I tend to agree. I think even with this screen protector on the official Samsung one, which I did recommend, the ease of opening this is fantastic. Now, one pet peeve when people are testing screen fingerprint sensors is that they would tap the screen and then they would see it and then they would place it. I really want to test the time it takes to open from a dead screen, like a screen is off. And you can clearly see, even though the S20 is not slow or anything like that, well, maybe it is slow, the S23 always beats it and it's way more accurate and we got a bigger area. So let's do another test. Obviously I never do it like this, but let's test the area. I'm going to kind of go, see, it did not match the sensor over there. You can see the S20 is struggling, but I moved my finger closer to the edge and it did, and it still picked up my fingerprint. So you can tell that the area that it picks up the fingerprint is a lot bigger. So major improvement, major quality of life improvement is with the S23 and the fingerprint sensor. I'm very happy with that. Now, I thoroughly tested the speakers and I have to say, it is a pretty decent upgrade from the S20. The S20 does sound more tinny because it lacks bass. With the S23, you get a lot more bass. So it just sounds more full and rich. So I'm extremely impressed for such a small device, how well the sound sounds. Now, one thing that's a little bit of a downside is I don't know if it's true or not, but I feel like the S23 is a little bit quieter. So if you put this at max volume and you put this guy, the S20, the old guy at max volume, I do notice that the S20 is a bit louder. But honestly, it goes pretty loud enough that I can like play some music or listen to a podcast and still walk around my room and be able to listen to it. So it's not going to be, you're not going to play a party with this, but really, really good bass improvements. And it just sounds wonderful. So what about the other things like haptics and phone call quality and other little tiny features? Well, one thing I want to be honest about is this did not have eSIM and it was never updated, at least in Canada, never had eSIM. And finally, the S21, the S21, S22, and S23 have eSIM technology. And that's just a nice bonus because when you go traveling, let's say you're going to Europe or Latin America or wherever, you can just pre-buy a eSIM. You don't have to go to some sketchy dealer, have them like swap out your physical SIM card and just pay someone. It's a lot more convenient to go before a flight to have your foreign eSIM loaded onto your phone. And when you land in the new country, you can just enable it and then you're ready to go. So eSIM technology, at least for Canadians, was not available on the S20. Now it's available on the S23. Big bonus. You get other things like Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth from 5.0 to 5.3. And these are all just nice incremental updates that are going to help with your radio efficiencies. What do I mean by that? Well, hopefully these new radios are going to be more power efficient and they're obviously going to be faster at their highest speed because Wi-Fi 6E is a tri-band. So it's going to use the higher 6 gigahertz connection. So if you have a router that supports it, you'll get all the benefits of Wi-Fi 6E. But honestly, those are the actual speeds. I don't really care about like the super high speeds unless you're doing VR and like crazy low latency gaming. I just want stuff that is more battery efficient. And I'm hoping with all these upgrades, we do get more efficient radios. Of course, this is a phone, so the call quality is going to be totally fine. The speakerphone, people hear me totally fine on the other side. It's really boring stuff. No, so there's not much to cover there. It would be really shocking if they would fail on that. Now, in terms of the haptics, I have to say, this is a premium phone. We're going to get really good haptics, and you also get all the waterproofing and the dust proofing and all that stuff. So wireless Qi charging, just the usual suspects you get. Okay, and now for the final bit, let's talk about the cameras. So with the upgrade to the SoC, we get a better image signal processor, and we're going to get faster data processing. So we're not just concerned about the actual sensors, like the actual optics. I mean, that's obviously very important, but seeing generational upgrades in the data processing and the ISP should help with the actual clarity of the image, how it handles more complex things like HDR and processing low light environment. Now, I do want to say that a lot of people complain about shutter lag, and that's just because Samsung has not tweaked their software in such a way that it recognizes a fast moving subject. What it does is it seems to always prioritize quality. So what it'll do is it will try to reduce the noise. So it will lower the ISO, and therefore it will have to increase the shutter speed, or it would have to decrease the shutter speed, so making it longer to take a photo. So if your subject is moving and you're in a low light, dim environment like indoors, if you don't hold the camera still and the subject is not still, it's going to be blurry and it's going to feel laggy because you're going to press it and it's going to take a while, maybe like a half a second, a millisecond, like a quarter of a second for it to recognize the photo. And a lot of people on iPhone say it's super snappy and fast like that. Well, you can download the camera assistant from the Samsung Galaxy store, and you can override this behavior such that it prioritizes the shutter speed, or like how sharp the image looks. And you're going to lose a little bit of quality because it's going to have to jack up the ISO and increase the sensitivity of the camera, which increases noise. So it's a trade-off, and it's really weird that Samsung has made the user make the decision. And one thing I do respect about Apple is that their user experience is a lot more simpler. The thing with this Samsung phone is that there's so many crazy toggles and settings like that. It's very confusing. For example, if I want to have HDR, there's the optimize scene. It does say that it exhibits behavior of HDR, which is to brighten the dark areas and to lower the highlights so that you don't get blown out skies and stuff like that. But if you download the camera assistant, there's auto HDR that you can also enable. So there's like duplicate settings, especially if you get the camera assistant, which you probably want to do because you want to get all the features and all the configurations you want. But to make it even funnier, they have another app called Expert RAW, which lets you take raw photos and have more control. But what's really weird is if you go into the photos, you can basically do the same thing here. You can go into more. So you can go into pro mode, and it's almost like you're taking raw photos. So the whole camera experience is a little bit effed up, to be honest. They have Expert RAW, they have camera assistant, and they have the stock photos. It's just, they need to stop bolting on hacks and just redo their camera experience to make it more intuitive. For example, I really hate that I have to go into settings to disable the default video stabilization. For example, let's say I'm in video mode, and this is really nice. I can turn on super steady. So it crops in a lot, but it also decreases your quality, but it obviously increases the steadiness. But let's say I just want to quickly change the video stabilization. I wish there was a widget on the front over here that I could toggle. The experience of video and photography and all that stuff, it's not the greatest. It's a little bit of a crazy UI. You will get used to it, and it's fine. It's totally cool. But if you look at Pixel, or the Apple, it's just it's an easier experience overall.
So this video would be way too long if I went in depth on comparing the 4 cameras between the S20 and the S23. So I made a whole dedicated video that focuses on that topic. I will link it in the description. Now, the comparison between the two cameras is quite interesting, and I do a lot of detailed analysis and pixel peeping using still photos and video. I even compared the S23 against its last year's model, the S22, which has the same rear cameras, the 3 cameras, to see if there's a noticeable difference in the image signal processor that is coming from the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Well, you have to check out that video, but I do summarize a little bit coming up.
So going through the camera test, I've noticed that there is a major improvement with the S23 over the S20. Every camera sensor is a lot sharper. One thing I didn't like was the default sharpness, the digital sharpness that it applied on the main sensor when you're at 12 megapixels. I really, really hated the look of that. It just looked really kind of amateur and like it just looked so bad. So I had to download the camera assistant app and then turn on the softening, which is very weird because usually it's the opposite. It's turn on, increase the sharpness. But anyways, if you can tweak it to the way that you like it, I think you can get some really nice results. And if you switch to the 50 megapixel camera, things look really good. For some reason, no matter what setting you are in, when you have the 50 megapixel, colors look less saturated. They look less sharp, which is what I want because it looks more like a regular photo, like from one that you would pay from a $1,000 DSLR, for example. But overall, there is a major improvement. I just noticed the sharpness overall, just a lot better. The dynamic range, the digital processing, everything is a lot better. And this is something that we expect because from the S20 to the S21, there wasn't really a major bump in terms of the actual camera. But the S22 was where we had the increase in the actual main sensor, where we had a bigger sensor, which increased the depth of field. and just allows it to capture more low light. So that's a nice big upgrade from the S22. And now we still have the same as the S22 for the S23. We get the new selfie camera, which is upgraded from 10 to 12, and it's a major difference as well. It looks really good, with the exception, but that selfie screenshot that I took, that was extremely yellow. I'm going to take another screenshot or another selfie, and then let's hope that that yellow was just a fluke. Let's take a photo here. Let's take a little wider shot. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So I just took a photo again. I do look kind of more yellowy on the S23, but the picture quality, the crispiness, the sharpness, it just looked a lot better with the new selfie camera. So I'm very happy with the new upgrade. At least we get a new sensor upgrade in this S23. We're still using the old S22 hardware, but hopefully we're getting some benefits from the increased processing speed and the ISP from the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. I also found that the portrait mode was a lot better, especially at the edge detection and just the quality in general. You can see in the videos side by side, I just look a lot better on the S23. So this is just really nice improvements overall from the S20. So you're getting that 3 generation upgrade. So let's talk about pricing. I just want to say I got this phone for about $200 US, and you might be wondering, well, how did you do that? Well, it's no secret that Samsung has really good trade-in offers. I actually had a really old phone, the Samsung S8, and I could trade it in for quite a big bonus amount. The actual value of the phone was $0. And another thing is you can, if you have some setup of work, you can get 10% off the retail price. So, or you can pretend to be a student. You can go on SBC if you're in Canada, or Percopolis, or Student Beans, or whatever. You can just sign up. I think it's like an $11 fixed fee. You just pay for the 1 year. You don't need any proof that you're a student. I'm obviously not a student anymore, unfortunately. And you can get 10% off, and you also get the extra bonus. And you get the headphones, the Buds 2, the ANC ones. I'm going to try and sell that. So after all the deductions, and also they throw in like $100 promo credit. There was actually a $50 one, but later they came back with a $100 one. So I contacted support to get the difference. Hopefully they send me that $50 credit. So all in all, if I sell this S20 for a decent amount, maybe I don't know, $200 or something like that. This is all US dollars. This phone overall will maybe cost me, in the worst case scenario, $350 US, but in the best case scenario, maybe $200 US. So really good trade-in deals, especially if you have an old phone laying around. If you have like a regular Pixel phone or a non-Samsung phone, or like an old one like an S7, you're not going to get that big trade-in bonus. So just be mindful of that. But I do think if you get that trade-in bonus, it's worth it. But if you're paying close to retail price, like 80% of retail price, never pay retail price for a Samsung phone. Please don't do it. But if you're paying close to that, I don't think it's worth it. I would say stick with the S20 because it's still a really great phone. It takes pretty decent photos. Most importantly, it's a very snappy phone. It just feels really nice to like open apps. Nothing feels slow. The last reason why I upgraded from the S9 and previous to that was the S7 was things were just getting really slow. I would open up the camera and it would take not forever, but you would feel that lag and it would just be it would just really ruin your day. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know. I use my phone quite exclusively because it's for work and whatnot, and I need things to be really responsive. That's why I disable animations. I don't need that little fancy animation, but I also need that processing speed. And I'm using the browser a lot more. I'm going on Reddit. I don't like download apps. So the processing speed, the gains from the S20 are quite substantial. And I also feel that the camera is quite substantial. I think the sharpness, especially from the ultra wide all the way to the telephoto, I just really like that. But all in all, if you are on the S20 and you're going to pay close to retail price, I wouldn't upgrade. I would just wait for another year, get the most value out of your phone, and then the S24 is probably going to be amazing. If so long as they stick with TSMC, if they go back to Samsung Foundry and claim that they made a faster chip, don't believe the hype. Look at the power efficiencies, look at the curves, the graph curves, and really judge them, because people who bought the S21 and S22 didn't get a great deal, in my opinion. So I think the S23 is a good phone. I think it's a good upgrade. You're going to get those battery efficiencies, at least from what I saw in the standby mode, and a very nice snappy CPU and 4 years of Android OS upgrades, which is a nice bonus. Unfortunately, the S20 is only stuck on the last one, I think 5.1 One UI 5.0 or 5.1 and Android 13. So it's not going to get Android 14. This will get, it's on Android 14, so another 4. So you're going to get all the way to Android 17. Anyways, that's it with me rambling. S23, good upgrade. Don't do it if you have the S20, or if you get a really good deal, go ahead and do it. But if you have anything less than S20, I think you should upgrade. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comment section down below. All the accessories and phones I mentioned will be linked in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.